crowd here this morning. Well, good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us in what will be for sure a great discussion of San Diego, Tijuana, California, Mexico, the Baja, and all the tremendous opportunities and the challenges that go along with living in this part of the country. And we have a superb representative to speak to those issues today. Before we start, if you would please stand and join me in a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We certainly appreciate you joining us either here in person in the Wind Room or via Zoom. For our remote and Zoom participants, please make sure that your audio is muted and your video is stopped, because we do record these sessions and we want to make sure that nothing other than the presentation itself makes it to the recording. Just a reminder for everybody, including the folks here in the room, this is a recorded session as well. Next month, on May 27th, our speaker will be Miss Jill Olin, an expert in both Homeland Security and an individual who has served a year and a half in Afghanistan. And she will talk to us about the aftermath of the Afghani government collapse, especially as it relates to women and children and those Afghanis who supported the United States during our 20 years in country. I'd now like to introduce Mr. John Jacobson, a director here at the Coronado Roundtable, who will introduce our guest speaker today. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Charlie. Good morning, everyone. Morning. Today's speaker, Thomas Reott, is a career member of the Senior Foreign Service with over 20 years of experience at the Department of State. He's been headquartered both in Washington, D.C. and outside of the country. He previously served as Minister Counselor for Economic Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City. In Washington, Mr. Reott served as Chief of Staff to the Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs and as Deputy Director in the Office of Afghanistan Affairs. In addition to Mexico, he's held overseas assignments in Spain, India, Colombia, Afghanistan, and Belgium at the U.S. mission to the European Union. Prior to his time in government, Mr. Reott worked in the private sector with Procter & Gamble and also served in the Peace Corps. Mr. Reott holds a master's degree in international affairs from the Fletcher School and also a degree in finance from Miami University of Ohio. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Consul General Thomas Reott.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me out here in beautiful Coronado. I grew up in Ohio. I was commenting on the way in. So I grew up in Ohio, and I believe, sir? I don't know. I believe it is recording. I don't know. Does this microphone have a purpose?
Yes.
Yeah, it does. It does. Can you not hear me? Okay. So I grew up in Ohio, and in Cleveland, the weather's not great for about half the year. And so I thought that in San Diego, it was 80 degrees and sunny 365 days a year. So when I moved here and actually lived through my first winter in the Cali Baja region, I discovered that it's actually a little bit cold here sometimes. So that was my adjustment to life here. I arrived to Tijuana last August to take over as the Consul General at our Consulate General in Tijuana. My district covers Baja California and Baja California Sur, so the whole Baja California Peninsula. As was mentioned, right immediately before coming here, I had been the Minister Consular for Economic Affairs down at our embassy in Mexico City. So I was there for 2 years. And it was actually, this is my third diplomatic posting in Mexico. It's the only country I've served in more than once. And it speaks to 2 things. One is I absolutely love Mexico. I think it is a fascinating country. I love the people, I love the food, I love the culture. But also, and this is something that I'll comment a bit more in my formal remarks, it is also a country of incredible importance to the United States. Our ambassador, Ken Salazar, likes to say that it is the most important country to the United States. And I think he's right. So, you know, for those of us who are diplomats, are policy junkies, are a little bit wonky like me, if you want to be in the game, it's a really good place to serve because there is so much happening in Mexico that matters to the United States. It's really exciting to know that the issues that you work on every single day are the issues that are part of the president's daily brief every single morning. And so for me, like that's why I joined. That's why I left the private sector and took a big pay cut to come into government, because I wanted to feel like I was serving my country and doing something that really mattered. I have with me today 2 folks on my team who are also proud to be serving their country, and I wanted to give them a minute to introduce themselves as well. Kim Scrivener, who is in charge of our public affairs section in the consulate. Public affairs in the State Department, we have 5 areas kind of specialization, one of which is public affairs. And the public affairs section does kind of 2 big aspects. One is press relations, so they handle all our media engagements, they clear the talking points. She makes sure that I don't say something that's going to get me in trouble or get me a nasty phone call from headquarters. And then the other side of it is the cultural affairs side, is all the cultural exchange, the student exchange, the speaker programs. Kim has done some really interesting things in Tijuana to deepen and strengthen the cultural ties between our 2 countries. And then I also have with me Corporal Nick Bonacera, a member of our Marine Corps detachment. The Marines, the State Department and the Marines have a really special relationship. They are posted at our diplomatic missions around the world. They keep us safe day in and day out. I know that a lot of folks in the audience today are retired military. Thank you to you for your service to our nation. And I just wanted to give Kim and Nick a minute to kind of introduce themselves and their background and what they do in our bilateral relationship. So first, Kim.
Thank you for the opportunity to introduce myself. We're happy to be here. As our Consul General said, I'm Kim Scrivener, Public Affairs Officer in Tijuana. This is my 6th post in the Foreign Service. So I started in Istanbul, and then I served in Bogota, Colombia, then Moscow, Russia, then Amman, Jordan, and then I went back to Moscow for a 2nd tour, and now I'm here in Tijuana, well, San Diego, Tijuana, as of August. So as the Consul General mentioned, I work in both media and cultural affairs at the consulate. Unlike embassies that are largely staffed with hundreds of employees, consulates are much smaller. So I'm the only American officer in public affairs, so I deal with both media and cultural affairs. In 4 of my posts, I focus specifically on cultural affairs. So I spent a lot of time bringing American artists and experts to the different countries, and we created speaker programs and different engagements for these American experts to go and meet people firsthand and interact with the community there. So I've really seen firsthand like the importance of cultural diplomacy. And now that I'm here in Tijuana, I'm much more focused on the media side. So working with the media, yesterday we just rolled out the Unity for Ukraine plan from President Biden about helping Ukrainians receive humanitarian parole in the United States. And as many of you probably know, they've been coming through the border here in Tijuana, but that opened up the possibility for them to enter directly from Europe. So we've been working with the media on that the last 2 days. So just really happy to be here. It's a really engaging place to work. Just a lot of, many decades of cross-cultural, cultural influence from the United States to Mexico and vice versa. So that's been a very, very different experience here than my other posts. But I really look forward to my 3 years here.
I'm Sarah, California through and through. I was born in Northern California, Fremont, and then happily joined the Marine Corps after 1 year of college. Wasn't for me, as many of us probably know. And came down, stayed at 29 Palms for 3 years. Happiest place on earth, as anyone in the place. I love it here. I loved it so much that I was itching away to get out. So I took this opportunity to become a Marine security guard. I do the security and operations at the U.S. Consulate or U.S. Embassy, and I work hand in hand with the diplomatic mission, protecting obviously the most important guy there and everybody in the building. I really enjoy my job. It is a lot better than being an Amtracker. 29 Palms, I promise you that. Nothing like 110-degree weather, but I loved it so much that I'm actually heading out to Sudan in 3 months. So I'm going back to 110 weather because I just love it that much. But that's really me, California through and through. I didn't know how cold the winters get here, even though cold is 69 degrees here. But definitely enjoy my time. And I love serving for this man to my right. So that's all. That's me.
We have a Marine Corps detachment with it's 6+1, right? Or is it supposed to be 7+1? 6+1. And they were down a couple of Marines. So these guys have been working long days for the last couple of months. But it's just an awesome group of guys, and keeps me young, going in every day and seeing these guys. We just had a new arrival just in the last couple of weeks. He was like 19 in like 4 days or whatever. It's like, man, oh man, look at these kids. They're so fired up and excited. It's really a lot of fun. And like I said, we owe so much in the State Department to the Marines that are out there with us every single day across the world, and really playing a major role in keeping us safe. And it's really for me personally, like, I don't have a military background, and but I've had an opportunity to serve alongside our military in a couple of my different assignments in Colombia and Afghanistan, and now every day with the Marines here, and it's an honor and something we don't take for granted at all. Okay, so let me talk a little bit more specifically about what we do and in the bilateral relationship with Mexico, and why the ambassador says it's the most important relationship we have, and why I agree. I'm going to take it kind of big picture and talk about U.S.-Mexico, and then I'm going to drill down a little bit and talk about stuff that's more germane to our lives here in this region of Southern California and the Baja Peninsula. We have 4 major priorities in our bilateral relationship with Mexico, probably none of which are going to come as a huge surprise to you guys. The 800-pound gorilla is migration. It is an issue that is of tremendous importance politically in our country and economically. It's an issue that, if you're not careful, can suck all the air out of the room, and you don't have any space to work on the other issues, which are also really, really important. But because it is the single issue in our bilateral relationship that can turn elections, right? It can influence elections. It's one that gets a tremendous amount of attention, both in Mexico City, in Washington, and across at all our consulates and embassy in Mexico. The second one is security. Here in the United States, right? Like, there's a lot of stories in the press about what's going on in Mexico on an insecurity front, with the drug trafficking organizations, with the murders, and with the general kind of insecurity. Unfortunately, there are a lot of Americans who come down into our consular district and get themselves in trouble, come down on vacation, do things that they wouldn't do at home, get themselves in trouble. We are the #1 diplomatic post in the world. If you think about all the countries in the world, there are more Americans who die of unnatural deaths in our consular district than anywhere else in the world. So we have a section in our embassy. I said earlier, we have 5 specializations. One of the specializations is consular operations. They're the people who issue passports and visas, but they're also the people who take care of American citizens abroad. And we have a section in that, a subsection of that section that deals with nothing but deaths of Americans in our consular district. As you can imagine, this is work that takes a pretty heavy emotional toll on these officers and our Mexican colleagues who work alongside us, because they're picking up the phone almost every day and calling a loved one in the United States and delivering bad news. But that security situation that we hear about so much in the United States is really a two-way street, right? Because it is United States demand for drugs that fuels that supply, right? If we weren't buying it, they wouldn't be selling it. It's also the southward flow of weapons into Mexico that gives the TCOs, the transnational criminal organizations, the firepower to at times outgun the military, the Mexican military and police forces, right? So you have an asymmetric relationship sometimes where the TCOs are actually better armed and in some cases better trained than the security forces in Mexico. So this is an issue where let me take a step back for a second. The Biden administration, when it came in about a year ago, decided that they were going to take a different approach to the relationship with Mexico than the Trump administration had taken. Under the Trump administration, the big focus of the effort was around migration. As you all well know, the dialogue, the statements out of the White House vis-a-vis Mexico were often confrontational and were very, very focused on the migration issue. And the relationship had stopped being institutional. We stopped having broad frameworks that we engaged Mexico on, and it became much more one-to-one. It became a much more personal relationship. So Jared Kushner, for example, ran a lot of the bilateral relationship with Mexico directly out of the White House. The Secretary of Department of Homeland Security had a direct line with Mexico, but some of the frameworks of the relationship basically went moribund. The Biden administration decided that they were going to try to revive some of these frameworks so that we had more institutional relationships with Mexico. And one of the areas that they did that in was in the security arrangement. And we started talking about the security relationship with Mexico in more terms of shared responsibility, that it is undeniable that the United States plays a role in the instability in Mexico. That doesn't forgive Mexico, right? It doesn't abdicate Mexico from their sovereign responsibility for securing their country, which the Mexican government will very clearly tell you that they're a sovereign country, right? They don't want the United States telling them how to suck eggs on a day in and day out basis, right? They're their own country, their own elected, freely elected government. And so that kind of shift in attitude about talking with Mexico in a more shared responsibility led to the signing a few months ago of the bicentennial framework on security. Under that arrangement, we work with the Mexican government across the security framework, across the security atmosphere, I guess you will, on issues of in the justice area, on justice reform and justice training, on new infrastructure and technology at the border to try to detect the southward flow of weapons and money, the northward flow of illegal migrants and drugs. We do prison reform and training for the prisons in Mexico. It's just a whole panoply of issues that we work collaboratively with the Mexican government under this bilateral framework agreement. The third priority area is on economics. Under the Trump administration, our free trade agreement, the NAFTA agreement was renegotiated. The NAFTA agreement at the time when it was signed was groundbreaking, right? Like it was a truly groundbreaking and incredibly important trade agreement, but it's 30 years old, or almost 30 years old. And at the time when it was signed, the internet didn't exist, e-commerce didn't exist. A lot of the aspects of our economic relationship were very different then. So it was a kind of an updating of the NAFTA framework. We call it the USMCA, United States, Mexico, Canada agreement. Each country kind of calls it their own thing. But that was part of the negotiation. That was part of the non-migration focused aspects of under the Trump administration. But that is now kind of getting kicked off and really focused on kind of some of the aspects that were negotiated under USMCA are now being basically brought to life because it was finalized only within a year of the end of the Trump administration. So that's a big focus, and included in that economic piece is environmental issues, particularly in the areas of green energy, which I'll come back to and talk to in more detail later. And then the fourth issue is that the ambassador likes to talk is sort of the cultural narrative. These are some pretty incredible statistics, I think, that kind of show the depth of the connections between our countries. So first off, this year, December, what's the exact date? 12th marks the 200th anniversary of the bilateral relationship between the formal diplomatic bilateral relationship between Mexico and the United States. It's when the first Mexican ambassador presented his credentials in Washington, D.C. to James Monroe or James Madison? Monroe, one of the Jameses. So under that bicentennial celebration, we are doing a lot of events across Mission Mexico to celebrate that bicentennial. So let me give you some statistics that kind of I think underscore a little bit. Like I told you, I'm a bit of a nerd, so I like statistics. So Mission Mexico. Why do I call it Mission Mexico? Because we have an embassy and then we have 9 consulates. In that embassy and 9 consulate, we have 2,500 employees, the majority of whom are actually Mexican nationals, not Americans, right? Like we employ a lot of Mexican nationals, and we would be absolutely dead in the water without our Mexican national team working side by side with us. They're the institutional knowledge. They're the experts on a lot of these issues, right? Like Kim and I, we come here, we're here for 3 years and then we move on, right? And then the next Kim, the next Tom show up, and we always have that cadre of Mexican nationals who can teach us the ropes and like have the continuity for us. Within that Mission Mexico structure, there are 35 US government agencies that we work side by side with. 9 consulates. We have them across the border. We have them in Guadalajara, Monterrey, and in Merida. And then we also have 9 consular agencies. Consular agencies are, that's who you call when you go to Cabo and lose your passport, right? Like they're the people on the ground in Cabo. We have them in locations around Mexico. They're generally staffed by American citizens who have chosen to live in those parts of the world, San Miguel de Allende, Cabo San Lucas, Cancun, what have you. The population of Mexico is 130 million people, right? So it's about 40% the size of the United States. In Baja California, there's 3.5 million people. 2 million of those live in Tijuana. That's the official statistic. Excuse me, some people say that there's upwards of 3 million people in Tijuana. And for those of you who have been there recently and look around, you can just see the unbelievable growth of Tijuana. We did an event last week or a couple weeks ago that displayed, there's a guy who lives here in La Jolla or Coronado? La Jolla. His name is Harry Crosby. I don't know if you guys have heard of him. If you haven't heard of Harry Crosby, Google the UCSD library has the entire collection of his photographs. There's like thousands of photographs that Harry Crosby did. He was a high school science teacher up in La Jolla, and one day just pulled the plug and said, you know what, I want to follow my passion. I want to be a photographer. And he fell in love with Mexico. In particular, he fell in love with Baja Peninsula. And he did trips across for 30 years down there for months at a time. And he did a collection of photographs on the Baja Peninsula. And one of them he did was on Tijuana. And we just did a display down in Tijuana at Secut, which is a cultural institution down there, of his photos. And it goes back to like what it looked like in the 60s. Now I've heard in my conversations since I've been here with people who've grown up and spent their lives in San Diego, and they say, oh yeah, we used to drive down there. We'd go down to Rosarito, we'd eat our lobster, and we'd come back and you'd cross the border in 10 minutes. And right, like, so those of you who like grew up here and remember those, it'd be like for you guys a trip back in time to see these photos. They're just incredible. So now we got somewhere between 2 and 3 million people living down there in Tijuana. There are 1.6 million Americans who live in Mexico. 1.6 million, like by far more than any other country. We estimate that there are 500,000 Americans on any given day that are in either Baja California or Baja California Sur, because they live there, they work there, they vacation there, they shop there. Some people actually still go down to Rosarito and eat their tacos and come back on the weekends. And I say 500,000 that we estimate there's 500,000. So now I'm going to do a little plug for my friends down in the consular section. If you do travel to Mexico, whether it's in my consular district or anywhere in Mexico, I highly encourage you to enroll in something called the Smart Traveler Enrollment Program. What it does is it just tells us that you're there. You register, you're coming, where you're staying, what your phone number is, etc. This program has been incredibly important to us in helping Americans in need when they're down in Mexico. It's not Big Brother looking out over your shoulder. No one's tracking you. No one's gonna cold call you and try to sell you, something. It's just a way that we can get in touch with you if, God forbid, there's an earthquake or something, there's a natural disaster, or there's some big security incident like happened in Nuevo Laredo, you may have seen in the press a few weeks back. It's It's the way that we in the State Department, what our core mission, there's nothing that I do that's more important. My top priority is the safety and well-being of Americans in Mexico. And that system really helps us and helps my team in cases where something goes pear-shaped and we need to help folks. That was my plug for that. So the depth of this relationship that we have with Mexico, underscored by the cultural ties, by the number of Americans living in Mexico, by the number of Mexicans who live up in the United States. Somewhere here, I have a statistic, which I can't actually find right now, about the number of Mexicans who live up in the United States. But it is, Kim, do you remember that? I can't find that number. 40 million. There are 40 million, there's only 300 and whatever million of us, right? So it's like over 10% of the US population has a cultural tie to Mexico. They're either first generation, second generation, third generation, right? Like they are Mexican Americans. So, right, like, again, right, there's no country that with whom we have such deep and broad ties as we do with Mexico. All right, so let me go a little bit deeper on the priority areas. Let's talk about the first one about migration, right? My suspicion is every single one of you guys has an opinion on this issue, right? It is incredibly divisive topic. But let me just talk to you a little bit about what the Biden administration is trying to do. And I'm going to preface that by saying there's no easy solution to this, right? If it were easy, this would have been solved a long, long time ago. But it's not. It's complicated. Like I said, it's divisive. Every administration comes in with a slightly different approach for lots of political reasons. Some of the initiatives that have been tried have gotten bogged down and have not gone forward. But what the Biden administration is trying to do, again, in partnership with the Mexican government, is to try to begin addressing the root causes of migration. Why are people leaving their homes and making the long, difficult, expensive, and dangerous journey across Mexico into the deserts of the United States, across the river into the United States, across the mountains here in Southern California into the United States? Like, why are they doing this, right? They're doing it for economic reasons. They're doing it for insecurity reasons, right? These are people who are looking just like my ancestors did when they left Germany 270 years ago. They're trying to provide an opportunity for a better life for themselves and for their kids, right? So what can we do to encourage them to stay home? How can we deal with the root causes of migration? And so what's happening right now behind the scenes, in fact, just yesterday, we had via Zoom, we had a video call with the Assistant Secretary for the Bureau of Population, Refugee, and Migration, who had just come from Panama, where she was with Secretary Mayorkas and others to talk with the Central American governments and the Mexican governments on trying to address some of these issues there. What can we do to help them increase security? What can we do to help them with providing economic opportunities? How can we encourage investments in good paying jobs in these areas so they don't have to come up to the United States and get jobs here? Simultaneously, we are expanding so-called legal pathways into the United States. So this is another part about sort of a change in the United States approach that happened before the Biden administration. It's been going on for about 10 years now. We all know for years and years and years, predominantly Mexicans, 90-some% of them were Mexicans, but that migrant labor has picked the food that ends up on our dinner tables every night, right? They process the chicken and the processing plants, et cetera. For a long time, almost all of these people were here illegally. In the old days, though, what would happen was they were seasonal workers. They would flow across the border, largely unimpeded. They would work for 6 months or so in the United States. Then they'd return back to their villages in Michoacan or wherever they came from. They'd build houses. They'd invest in their communities. But that all stopped in the 80s when there was a large increase in enforcement against illegal migration into the United States. And when we clamped down on the border, what happened was a lot of those people then stopped making that annual migration across because they were afraid that if they went back home to Michoacan to celebrate Christmas with their family, that they might not be able to get back into the United States. So they became kind of permanent illegal populations that were living in the United States. We had a program back in the 60s and 70s called the Bracero program that brought migrant labor into the United States, primarily to work in the farms. A lot of those people were presented pathways to citizenship. Many of the interlocutors that I've met in Southern California who are now members of the county board of governors, who are members of the state, California State Assembly, guys like Ben Hueso, et cetera, their fathers, grandfathers were part of this program where braceros became American citizens, and now their kids, second generation, first generation kids, are productive, positive members of our society. So the attitude has been like, look, we need to do two things, right? We need to recognize that we need this labor in the United States, right? And we need to ensure that when these people come over to the United States and they're working, they're not getting in trouble, they're here working hard, they're doing jobs we need them to do, that we're ensuring that they are not being taken advantage of, that they are not, that their human rights, that their labor rights are not being abused here in the United States, which, let's admit, has happened, right? So a lot of these people now are coming under what's called the H-2 visa program. We process them here in Tijuana at our consulate, and then also down in Monterrey are the two predominant processing points for these H-2 visas. So in the past year, we have issued 360,000 H-2 visas for Mexican workers to come up. Of that 360,000, 270,000 are agricultural workers. I had the opportunity a couple months after I arrived, I went up to, I will admit that I get Riverside and Oceanside confused. I'm not sure where I was, one of those two sides. And we went up to a farm up there that grows tomatoes. Super interesting story. The farm is run by an immigrant family from India who came to the United States about almost 100 years ago now. So this would be like third generation. And I mean, this is the kind of stories like I love. Like again, I'll repeat, I'm a nerd, super into genealogy. I've traced my family back, all these stories about my family, what they've done, right? So this guy from India, he was a Sikh from the Punjab, came over to the United States, landed in New York, looked around, said, I don't want to be in New York. So he comes out to New Mexico. He falls in love with a Mexican-American woman, gets married, and together they start a tomato farm in Riverside, Oceanside. And it's now a huge agricultural tomato growing area. And this guy relies on these H-2 workers. So I went up there and we toured the farm, and I talked to some of these guys. We had families there, grandpa, son, and grandson. 3 generations of kids who have been working, of family members who have been working at this farm for 20 years, literally crying, the grandpa crying, talking about how this program changed the course of his family's life, how the money that he made with that, he's been able to educate his kids, he's been able to build a house, he has safe, dignified work that he does. He's recognized as being a valuable member of his community there. He's respected when he comes up here, he's taken care of, right? Like, these are the kind of things that we should be proud of, right? That we are recognizing that we need this labor, we need these jobs, we have a moral responsibility to treat these people well when they are here, right? And we have a program to do it. We're executing it. Here in my consulate, we did 70,000 of these visas last year. Most of them come here to California. In Monterrey, most of their workers go to Georgia, Florida, and kind of Midwest, East Coast kind of stuff. But most of the folks that we're processing here come up here to California. We do background checks on them. We do all the stuff to make sure that we're not letting in, somebody that we don't want to be letting in. We do what are called validation studies, where after the fact, we take representative samples of them. We call them, we make sure, did they actually come back or did they skip out? Last year when they did the stories, we literally could only not find 2 people. Only 2 people out of, what was that number I said, 70,000 that we did. Now we didn't call all 70,000, but we did statistically representative sample, but couldn't find 2 people. And that doesn't mean they're here, they could be back home, right? So, I say all this because I think it is really important for us to take an issue that is so politically charged and so divisive and think about it in more detail, think about it in more depth, and think about, like, what is our responsibility as a nation? How can we kind of do a little bit of self-reflection and think about how we got here and how our ancestors got here and what we actually need in terms of our economy, the functioning of our economy, and how can we look at doing this in a way that kind of makes sense for both of our countries. And I'm like I said, I'm really proud of what my team does on this issue. I'm proud of the approach that the U.S. government has taken, the State Department, the Department of Labor, et cetera, not only under the Biden administration. This has been going on, like I said, for years. And I think it's something that that is deserving of expansion. And in fact, we project an additional 30% on top of that number in this year, in 2022. Okay, let's talk about the economics a little bit. Again, some statistics. So the US border with Mexico is 2,000 miles long. We have 55 active land border crossings. Some of them are big, like down here at San Ysidro and Otay. Some of them are dusty little outposts in Texas. But we have 55 of them. More than $1.6 billion in trade crosses that border every single day. That's $1.1 million a minute that crosses our border. The GDP of Mexico's economy is $1.3 trillion. It's the 16th largest economy in the world. And Mexico's economy is changing. When we first signed NAFTA 30 some years ago, it was largely, we sent the widgets to Mexico, the widgets got put together in Mexico and shipped back to the United States, right? Very low value added, high labor, low technology kind of jobs. That world is over now. If you could go into some of the factories in Mexico, you'd be blown away. They're every bit as modern and cutting edge and technologically advanced as any factory here in the United States. We found out in a very mind-blowing and woke us up kind of way when the COVID pandemic hit, how integrated our economies are and how much we rely on Mexican factories to keep our factories going. When COVID hit in those early dark days 2 years ago, hit really in March, April, May, when we were locked down, factories were closed, our factories were closed. And if you remember those times, there was a lot of people that were out of work. We had a lot of factories that could not operate because they didn't have parts from Mexico. At the time, I was the Minister Consul for Economic Affairs at the embassy, and I led our negotiations with the Mexican government to try to find a way forward to reopen factories in Mexico to ensure that the trucks could continue to flow across our borders, and to do it in a way, not to put too fine a point on it, but to do it in a way that we weren't killing people, right? Because at that time, like, we had no idea what this thing was. We didn't really understand how it was being transmitted. We didn't really know how to protect ourselves. We were making educated guesses. Our medical community, Mexican medical community, was doing things that they thought in their judgment was what was needed to keep us safe. But we were kind of building the plane as we were flying it, right? But we knew that people were going to go hungry if our economy shut down, right? Like, we literally were having conversations like, okay, are we going to die of COVID or are we going to die of hunger because we don't have food and we don't have jobs, right? Like, that was the kind of conversations that we were having. And so we set about trying to figure out how to open up our factories, do it in a safe way, get the economy running. I was having daily conference calls with the Chamber of Commerce up in Washington, D.C., with the White House, with DHS, with Mexican government officials at the state, local, and federal level to figure all this out. We got it done. We got it working. I think we did it in a really responsible way. We found a balance. It was like nothing I'd ever done in my life before. Like I said, I work in Mexico because it matters. It's exciting. There's a lot of stuff going on. And I really, truly felt like my team and I were making a significant difference in a lot of people's lives in doing that work. So we got it done. And then we took a big step back and we said, wow, how do we ensure that this doesn't happen again? Because what we realized, right, was that a lot of our widgets are being made over in Asia. And then they're coming into Mexico and they're getting value added here and they're getting put into the cars and the airplanes. Like, we literally had DOD calling us up on the phone and say, look, we have our helicopters, right? Like, we cannot supply our military if factory A, B, or C isn't operating, right? Like, our helicopter fleets, our aircraft are going to stop being able to be operated. So we realized that we needed to figure out a way to better protect our supply chains. And part of that requires us to do what's called nearshoring or onshoring, right? There's a recognition that we are relying too much on our supply chains over there in Asia, and we need to bring some of this closer to home where we have the ability to have a bit more control over that. So I mentioned earlier that part of the Biden administration's approach is to reinstitutionalize the relationship. And so I mentioned about the bicentennial framework on the security side. The other thing that he did was to restart the high-level economic dialogue. It was an initiative that was launched during the Obama administration, and then in the Trump administration, it was put on mothballs. When I was in Mexico City, before coming here, I wrote the recommendation with our charge d'affaires and our ambassador to Washington, recommending to the Biden administration that they restart that initiative. The White House got behind it. It has been relaunched. We've had a couple meetings already. In fact, there was just the second high-level meeting. It's chaired at the assistant secretary level. And a key aspect of that high-level economic dialogue is to figure out with Mexico what we can do to incentivize some of these companies to come back home from Asia. A lot of that is ripe to be brought back to Tijuana, Mexicali area, because the labor force in our consul district is particularly well-trained, well-educated. We have an amazing depth of maquila labor in the Tijuana, Mexicali area that's working in aerospace and electronics, et cetera. And so we think there's a lot of opportunity to bring this back. So that's a big part of the high-level economic dialogue. One last statistic, and I'll go on. I think 90% of California's exports go to Mexico. So it shows you how here in our region that is so tied. There's what's this statistic? Over 1 million trucks crossed the border between Baja California and California last year. 1 million trucks. Okay, let me go then to the last area. How are we doing on time? Which is conservation. And this is an area that I suspect for you all is really near and dear to your heart, right? You all are painfully aware of the pollution that has been flowing down the Tijuana River into the estuary and out into the Pacific Ocean. The beaches in Imperial Beach are closed more than half the year last year, and the year before that. I know that it affects here in Coronado as well, the beaches in Coronado. It is a problem that has been going on for a long, long time. It is, Tijuana just grew too fast. The infrastructure couldn't keep up. Mexican government didn't properly invest in the infrastructure, the water infrastructure. We have a treatment plant that handles a fair amount of that, but in rainy season, it can't handle it all. So some of that water goes straight out. The aguas negras, as we say, which is the polite way to say poopy water, goes right out into the ocean. And then we have another big problem, which is a water treatment plant in a place called San Antonio de los Buenos, which is essentially non-functioning. And so all that water that gets collected, wastewater that gets collected there, is basically dumped straight out into the Pacific Ocean. And so depending on how the currents flow, depends on whether your beaches get closed or not. This is my top priority. This is a top 10 priority for our ambassador in Mexico City, and he's got the whole country. He is very, very engaged on this. The Environmental Protection Agency is very, very engaged in this. The Mexican government, this is the good news, they are also very engaged in this. Part of the USMCA renegotiation, and you can thank your elected members of Congress from both parties here in California, insisted that $300 million, that part of that USMCA package, $300 million was earmarked for water issues in the Tijuana River, Tijuana estuary. So that $300 million, the EPA is in the process, they have a plan that they put forward. They're in the process of getting all the environmental studies being done. The plan is to break ground next year. We are working, and this is kudos to my predecessor. I don't know if you guys met Sue Sarnio, who came before me. She worked really hard on this. And one of the things we diplomats do is we talk. We talk a lot. And we use our good offices to try to get people who don't necessarily talk to each other, to get them talking to each other. And this was a big thing that Sue achieved. She really brought all the disparate parties on this issue together, got them around the table, and got them to start talking. Because it's actually a complicated issue with a lot of different parties who have to play a role in this. For us to get to the point where your beaches aren't closed, we need dozens of agencies involved in coming to the table and solving this. There are a lot of people at the state, municipal, and federal level who have to work on this. And Sue got them all to the table, got them talking, and there is no daylight between us and the Mexican officials on the importance of solving this issue. And what's happening right now is, as their commitment, right? Like at the end of the day, they're the ones flushing the toilet, right? It's coming up our way. And so they recognize that this is, again, shared responsibility, right? There are things that we're going to do on our side of the border, but they got to do things on their side of the border as well, which they fully recognize and accept. So they have these 14 priority projects, and what they're doing right now is they're kind of working on, in cooperation with EPA and IBWC, the International Boundary Water Commission, which manages the binational water issues. They're figuring out essentially how to prioritize and sequence those projects, like where are you going to get the most bang for the buck? How do you want to do this? How do they fit in with our plans to make sure that we're not doing something on our side, which is what has happened in a lot of cases in a number of years, right? Like we just kind of plow forward, right? Like this is one of the greatest things about being Americans, right? Like we got a hammer and like everything looks like a nail, right? We just want to go out and fix stuff. But without that coordination, we sometimes build stuff that we could have done better if we had done it in cooperation on the south side of the border. So that's what we're trying to ensure right now. The ambassador is going to come back up here in early May. We're going to have a big border conference. So just to give you an indication of how much the ambassador values this part of our 2,000-mile border. In 6 months, he's been up here 4 times. He's coming here for the 5th time in May. He is wearing my team out in a good way, right? Like, I love that he's up here. It tells me that what we're working on is really important, and that my team and I, right, we're doing a lot of good stuff. We're getting stuff advanced, right? If we weren't getting anything done, he wouldn't be coming up here. But he's come back up here for the 5th time. We're going to have this border conference. We're going to focus again on the water issues. We hope to be able to announce at that time the concrete plan on the way forward on this issue. And I really hope that by the time I'm done here in Tijuana in a couple of years, that we are seeing a really concrete difference in the quality of the Pacific Ocean, and so that we can swim in the ocean. The surfers aren't getting sick. Our Navy SEALs aren't getting sick. Our Border Patrol colleagues who are sometimes being exposed to this toxic stuff, they're not getting sick. That the quality of life of our residents on north and south of the border is being improved. So let me just, why don't I stop there? I think we're gonna take a coffee break maybe, and then come back, and I'll be happy to answer your questions. We're gonna do, so this part was all recorded. We're gonna turn off the recording device, and then I will take off my diplomatic hat, and I'll be super candid with you, and I'll answer your questions as honestly and frankly as I can. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. Short break, we'll be back at 11:10, and we'll go to 11:30. Thanks, everybody.